The church at Rome at first was an informal gathering of Christian believers, many of whom had been converted to Christianity in different parts of the empire and had subsequently settled at the metropolis. The salutations in chapter 16 prove that Paul, at the time of writing the epistle, was acquainted with a considerable number of them. This acquaintance could not have been made at Rome. The list in Acts 2, 9-11 mentions strangers of Rome among the 3,000 that were added to the Christian church on the day of Pentecost. These were Jews residing at Rome who, after their conversion and return to the metropolis, constituted a part of the Roman congregation, the remainder being converted Gentiles. Most of the names mentioned in Romans 16 are those of Gentiles. That the nucleus of a church must have existed very early is proved by the fact that Paul informs the Romans that apopollon eton he had been wishing to visit them and preach to them, chapter 15 verse 23, 1 verse 10. His engagements elsewhere had hitherto prevented, chapter 1 verse 13, chapter 15 verse 22. He hoped, however, soon to accomplish his desire, but his visit must be a short one, because he has to carry a charitable collection to the church at Jerusalem, and because Spain and not Italy is to be the terminus of his missionary labours, chapter 15 verses 23 to 27, Acts 20 verse 2 and following. For these reasons, he sends them a written statement of the gospel plan as a preparation for a personal visit, making a long stay with them unnecessary. The journey of Phoebe, a deaconess of the church at Cenchrea, the port of Corinth, affords an opportunity of sending the epistle, chapter 16 verse 1. The Romish tradition, resting mainly upon a vague statement of Eusebius that Peter went to Rome in the reign of Claudius and founded a church there, of which he continued to be the bishop for 25 years, is incredible for the following reasons. 1. According to Acts 15, Paul finds Peter at Jerusalem as late as the year 50, still labouring with the apostles and elders in Palestine and Syria. 2. According to Galatians 2:11, Peter still finds his field of labour in Western Asia as late as AD 55. Paul meets him in Antioch at this date. 3. According to 1 Peter 5:13, Peter is connected with the church in Babylon as late as AD 60. That the first epistle of Peter was addressed to dispersed Christians in Asia Minor, whose condition and needs would have much more naturally come under the eye of an apostle on the banks of the Euphrates than on the banks of the Tiber. 4. Had the church at Rome been founded by Peter in AD 42 and been under his presidency from that time onward, it is highly improbable that Paul would have made it any apostolical visit at all, or have written it an apostolic epistle, for in chapter 15 verse 20 he states it to be his principle of evangelistic labour to preach the gospel not where Christ is named, lest he should build upon another man's foundation. 5. If in the face of these objections it still be claimed that Peter was the founder and bishop of the church in Rome, the entire absence in Paul's epistle of any allusion to Peter is inexplicable. It is generally agreed that Paul wrote the epistle to the Romans at Corinth during his third missionary tour. The proofs are these. First, according to chapter 15 verse 25, the writer is just starting for Jerusalem with money which has been contributed for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. This collection was completed at Corinth, as appears from 1 Corinthians 16, 1-3, 2 Corinthians 9. Secondly, the epistle is sent by the hands of Phoebe from Cenchrea, the port of Corinth, chapter 16 verse 1. Thirdly, Paul's host is Gaius, and Gaius was a citizen of Corinth, 16 verse 23, 1 Corinthians 1:14. Fourthly, Erastus sends a greeting by Paul, chapter 16 verse 23, and Erastus lived at Corinth, 2 Timothy 4:20. The epistle to the Romans is the sixth in the series of the Pauline epistles, having been preceded by 1 and 2 Thessalonians, written at Corinth, AD 53, by Galatians, written from Ephesus, AD 54, by 1 Corinthians, written from Ephesus, AD 55, by 2 Corinthians, written from Ephesus or Macedonia, AD 56. Gueric's date for the epistle to the Romans is AD 58. The authenticity of the epistle to the Romans is strongly supported. It is mentioned in the list given in the Muratorian canon as early as AD 60. The Pescito and Italia versions of it date at least as far back as AD 200. There are citations of or allusions to it in Barnabas, Clemens Romanus, Ignatius, Polycarp, Clemens Alexandrinus, Theophilus of Antioch, Tertullian, and Origen. These authorities cover the period AD 100 to 250. Chapters 15 and 16 have been impugned by Semler, Eichhorn, and Bauer in support of their individual theories, but they are found entire and complete in the Vatican and Sinaitic manuscripts, AD 325 to 350, as well as in the later ones, and are included in the Peshitta version of the epistle. The diplomatic evidence is as decisive for the genuineness of the last two chapters of the epistle as of any. The aim of the epistle to the Romans is didactic. The main object of Paul is to furnish the Roman Church with a comprehensive statement of evangelical doctrine. No book of Scripture comes so near to being a body of divinity as this. It is systematic and logical from beginning to end. Apostasy and redemption are the hinges upon which everything turns, and in discussing these the writer touches either directly or by implication upon all the other truths of Christianity. The Epistle to the Romans is, therefore, the novum organum of the Christian religion. I know, says Jacobi, no deeper philosophy than that of Paul in the 7th chapter of the Epistle to the Romans. In merely natural men sin dwells. Regeneration is the foundation of Christianity. He who expels the doctrine of grace from the Bible utterly expunges the Bible. In a similar matter, Coleridge expresses himself. I think St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans the most profound work in existence, and I hardly believe that the writings of the old Stoics, now lost, could have been deeper. Undoubtedly it is and must be very obscure to ordinary readers, but some of the difficulty is accidental, arising from the form in which the epistle appears. If we could now arrange this work in the way in which we may be sure St. Paul would himself do, were he now alive and preparing it for the press, his reasoning would stand out clearer. His accumulated parentheses would be thrown into notes or extended to the margin. Another view of the main design of this epistle is that it is polemic against Judaism. Bauer maintains that the writer has the early Ebionitism in his eye. The objections to this are the following. 1. The matter is addressed to Jewish Christians in common with Gentile. Both divisions are equally regarded as believers in Christianity. Compare chapter 2 verses 9, 10, 17, chapter 4 verse 1 and following, chapter 9 verse 1 and following. 2. There are no warnings against Judaism as such, as there are in Corinthians and Galatians, which are polemic epistles to some extent. 3. There is nothing in the epistle that implies that the Roman Church was in danger of apostatizing from evangelical truth to Jewish ceremonialism. The internal indications, such, for example, as the Greek names in chapter 16, go to show that the Gentile Christians were in the majority and were the controlling power. 4. Whenever there are any injunctions in the way of caution or reprobation, as in chapter 16, verses 17 to 20, they are addressed to the whole church and have no more reference to Jews than to Gentiles. That the epistle has a polemic reference towards legality, as the contrary of evangelical faith, and that this gives a colour to it as a whole, is evident. But such polemics as this is aimed at human nature generally, and not at the Jew particularly. The Gentile, equally with the Jew, is liable to self-righteousness, and the epistle combats self-righteousness from beginning to end. The analysis of the epistle to the Romans shows that its plan is extremely simple and logical. St. Paul discusses the necessity, the nature, the effects, and the individual application of the thekeosune theou, or gratuitous justification. Under these 4 heads he brings into the first 11 chapters the dogmatic substance of the epistle. He then enunciates in the remaining 5 chapters the principles of Christian ethics and morality, which he deduces from this evangelical method of justification and connects immediately with it. The epistle to the Romans, therefore, like the Pauline epistles generally, combines both theory and practice, the latter being founded upon the former. The scheme of the whole work, then, is as follows. 1. The doctrine of gratuitous justification, chapters 1 to 11. 1. Necessity of gratuitous justification, chapters 1 to 3 verse 20. 2. Nature of gratuitous justification, chapters 3 verse 21 to 4:25. 3. Effects of gratuitous justification, chapters 5 to 8. 4. Application of gratuitous justification, chapters 9 to 11. 2. Christian Ethics and Morality, chapters 12 to 16. 1. Duties to God and the Church, chapters 12, 1 to 13, chapter 14, 1 to chapter 15, 13, chapter 16, 17 to 20. 2. Duties to the State, chapter 13, 1 to 7. 3. Duties to Society, chapters 12, 14 to 21, chapter 13, 8 to 14. 4. Personal References, Greetings and Benediction, chapters 15 verse 14 to 16 verse 16, chapter 16 verse 21 to 27. Introduction to Romans by William G.T. Shedd. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.